Hello.
Hey,
Welcome.
Kylie.
Hi, how are you?
I am so good today. I am so good today. I think I just jumped right over you. What were you going to say?
Yeah,
You were going to say welcome, weren't you?
I
And I
was
got
going to
too
say
excited.
welcome back to the green room. We are
We
in a
are.
special place here in the green room. But yes, also you're in a great place. You're feeling good. I'm feeling
Yeah,
good.
it's
It's
been a good
Friday.
week.
It's been an
Mm-hmm.
incredible week. Yeah. We're very
It's been
lucky.
a good week. We've learned a lot in this week
hmm
in particular. We've learned a
hmm
lot this entire month of the entire month of February. We learned a lot. We're excited about March, and
hmm
we are sitting in the green room with another guest that needs no introduction, really, but we will give you one.
hmm We are so excited to have today the man, the myth, the legend, my husband, our friend, Dr. Cyrus Khambatta. Yay! Thank you so
Yay!
much for being here
What's
today
up,
with us.
ladies? Thank you for having me here. I'm excited and I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Well, likewise, thank you.
We appreciate you, and I'm going to read about you now. So, just in case there is anyone out there who doesn't really know about the man, the myth, the legend, or they thought of someone else when we said that, we will let you know who we're talking about straight
They were
away.
like,
So,
"Oh,
sorry.
cool! David Goggins is going to be on the
Right.
podcast," and then they're like, "Oh, it's that guy instead.
No,
What is going on?"
sci-fi.
Yeah, close enough. I know. Or the sunglasses go on, and we do have Morpheus. So, it could be just about any
There we go.
creative
You
idea
want
that you
this
have.
style? There we
I
go.
know for those that are just listening, Cyrus has his sunglasses on.
That's right. I'm going to
Yep.
do the rest of the podcast just like this. If you're cool with it.
All right.
Okay.
Looking slick. Okay. Hold on. I might sneeze.
Yeah, get that sneeze out.
10 degrees. Okay. Here we go. Cyrus Khambatta, PhD, is a New York Times bestselling author and the co founder of Amla Green, a company that makes anti inflammatory medicinal tea and coffee products. He has been living with type 1 diabetes for more than 20 years and has helped more than 100,000 people improve their health and fitness using plant based nutrition, intermittent fasting, and daily movement. He is a subject matter expert in reversing insulin resistance, reversing cardiovascular disease, permanent weight loss, and mitochondrial biogenesis. Very cool. Welcome, Cyrus.
Those are all big words.
Yeah.
Let's have some fun. I mean, the truth is that there's a lot to talk about when it comes to insulin resistance and mitochondrial biogenesis, the synthesis of new mitochondria and inflammation and anti-inflammation. So, let's kind of walk people through what the problem is and what they can do to resolve the problem because I love the super nerd biology and I know you guys do too.
Mhm.
So, maybe we can geek out a little bit.
We sure can. And it's funny because like that's one of the things that I remember just being it like when we first met, I was so attracted to like your super nerd, the super nerd inside of you.
Why,
I
thank you.
love the science. You're very welcome. But more importantly, we want to get started with a kickoff question here. Uh Most importantly,
Most
what
importantly,
is the song, Cyrus, that will get you on the dance floor more than
Oh, the
any?
song that will get me on the dance floor.
Yeah.
There's actually many songs that will get me on the dance floor.
hmm
Um,
I've seen it.
One of them I think that comes to first to mind is I'm blanking on the name of it. It's a
Uh-oh.
Michael Jackson song. You
I'm
Want to Be
gonna
Starting
walk.
Something by
Oh,
Michael
yes.
Jackson. I freaking love
I
that
know
song.
this.
I would love to learn how to dance like him and like nail his dance moves. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Awesome.
another song that really has a very special place in my heart when it comes to the dance floor, there's actually two. Number one, Young MC, which is Busted, because I know every single word to that song and I can go nuts with that song. I freaking love it. But then number three, in no particular order, is Freedom from George Michael, because
Mhm.
when that
Oh, that's a
song was
good one.
played at our wedding, the
Mhm.
entire wedding got on, like everybody that was there
Yeah.
got on the dance floor together, was
Yeah.
circled up just spontaneously. Everybody was belting out the words. We were all having a fantastic time. And I was like, this is never going to happen again in my life. Soak it up right now. It was awesome.
Yeah. It was
You remember
epic.
that, Kylie? You
I
remember that well?
absolutely. Oh yes. Oh yeah. It was incredible.
That sounds
Such
like
a
a
great moment.
hands up in the air experience.
What was
Oh
even cooler too was that the next morning when we were kind of reminiscing and being like, "Oh, what was your favorite part of last night?" I swear to you, almost every single person was like, "George Michael Freedom, George
yeah.
Michael Freedom, George
Yeah.
Michael Freedom, George Michael
Yeah.
Freedom." Everybody felt it at the same time, and I was like, "Damn, you felt that too? That was great."
Yeah. We had a live band and it was like just so amazing.
Yeah,
They
it was.
rocked the house down. Like it was
They killed it.
insane. It was insane. And it's funny because Cyrus and I are known to pull out some karaoke moves,
Mm-hmm.
and that song comes up in our karaoke playlist a lot. And by the way, Cyrus, Lauren and I were guessing, we had like a little game of like what song do you think Cyrus is going to pick? And I was like, oh, something from Michael Jackson will be on that list.
Oh, no way. You knew it
Yeah.
right off the bat. Well, let
Yeah.
me flip the question on you guys. What's yours, Lauren? And then Kylie, you tell me.
This came up. I
Yeah.
don't have one. It's
I know.
impossible. There's a genre that I don't like to dance to, but most songs that are going to give me enough of a good feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That sounded like I just said JT, Justin Timberlake. That sounded
Yeah.
like I just said, didn't it?
Can't stop the
But
feeling.
yeah, no,
Wait, wait,
I
wait, wait,
mean,
wait, wait, wait. Hold on. You can't be asking other people this question without a answer yourself. That
I
I don't.
I can't because I've got too many playlists in my head all the time. So anything
Okay.
blues rock, I love blues rock, but anything EDM, I'm an EDM girl
Yeah,
for
me
the
too.
most part. And
Okay.
that makes me feel like I need to join you when I
Oh,
go
sick.
ahead and say
Oh.
that I'm an EDM girl. Not that I wear my sunglasses at night. That's not it.
I wear
I
my
know. They are crooked, aren't
sunglasses
they?
at night.
I know.
Oh, that's a good look. Kylie,
I
where are your
determined.
aviators?
I don't have a pair.
Oh man.
I didn't bring my sunglasses with me to the
Okay,
office.
well, you tell us
My
what is
song
the song that gets you on the dance floor?
for me? Oh,
Mhm.
Dancing Queen. Easy.
Ooh,
Dancing
I was gonna
Queen.
say "Shake It Off" from Taylor Swift, but okay, this is good.
Well, yes, also that one, but Dancing Queen is like a surefire, like get me going because I mean, right now it's just like it's also part of my mom life and gets
Totally.
me dancing in the morning, right, with Indy. So
Okay,
anyway,
look, I'm going to pull up the first playlist I see on my list of 45 playlists and see what's at the top of this thing. ATB, Your Love. Nobody knows it. That's okay.
no,
That's okay because
Never heard of it. Okay.
we can dance. We can dance to
it's
that.
okay.
EDM,
We
most
can
people don't
dance if
know
we
what
want to.
the name of EDM songs, and it doesn't matter.
That's
It's
okay.
just a vibe.
It's the flow. It's the vibe. It's just a vibe. Names no longer needed. Just a vibe.
Right. Exactly.
Well, thank you for answering that question, Cyrus. We are going to eventually build a playlist of our green room guests, our green
No
room
question.
playlist. So,
Mhm.
in the meantime, we would love to pick your brain and get into some conversation about, nutrition. You studied nutritional biochemistry. You have this incredible wealth of knowledge and about cellular biochemistry, but obviously nutritional biochemistry. But like, what does that mean? And like, why should people care about nutrition and the things that they eat every day?
It's funny when you say like, "What the hell is nutritional biochemistry?" Because I think there's a lot of people who are like, who don't understand that phraseology. And I'll be the first person to admit to you that for a couple of years while I was studying it, I was like, "What the hell is nutritional biochemistry? I don't even
Mhm.
understand what this is." Right?
Mhm.
The way that I like to think about it is it's literally just super nerd nutrition. That's all. It's like rather than saying, "Oh, blueberries are good for you,"
Mhm.
you'd be like, "Oh no, let me tell you the actual compounds that are found in the blueberries. Let me tell you about the anthocyanins. Let me tell you about the phytochemicals. Let me tell you about the macronutrient profile, and then I'm going to use that to explain how it interacts with your small intestine and what are all the enzymes required to digest it properly." Blah 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 blah. And before you know it, you're like, "Oh my god, I'm sorry I even asked the question about blueberries. Good lord." Right? But that's the world of like, let's break it down into its individual microscopic parts and then try and understand what are all these microscopic parts and why do they matter. And then from that you can try and figure out, okay, well, what types of foods are beneficial for reversing chronic diseases? What a concept, right? What types of foods actually create chronic diseases? What a concept, right? And so for 5 years when I was studying at UC Berkeley, I was studying many different aspects of like insulin resistance. What causes insulin resistance? How do you induce it in animals? How do you reverse it? Is it reversible? What is the timeline required to induce it and to reverse it? How do you know when it is reversed? Can you do it via fasting? Do you do it through food? Do you do it through exercise? Blah, 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 blah. Right. So that's like all the microscopic questions that you have an opportunity to ask and study. And then over the course of 5 years, you start to do a bunch of studies to try and get to some conclusions about, what is this insulin resistance thing? And in the process, you guys understand, it's a universe, right?
Sure.
You're asking one question, but before you know it, all of a sudden you have like 9 million questions in your head and you're like, wow, this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Well, so what did you conclude
What did
after
I
5
conclude?
years?
I concluded that I got a lot of questions and I have very few answers. That's what I concluded.
Well, here's the reason I'm asking that. And it's because I know what you concluded. I've read your book many times. I understand the significance of what you've learned about insulin resistance. And the reason I'm asking this is because there's some people listening right now who either don't know the term insulin resistance, they don't understand how it develops, they don't understand the background, they don't understand how their bodies are working. And that's normal. I think that's actually the norm in our human world right now. And unfortunately, there's so much messaging out there about nutrition. And so for somebody like you who has studied nutrition at such a depth, like this true depth of nutrition study, you said it's like super nerd nutrition. Okay. That means you've studied it from a biological perspective, from a physiological perspective, an anatomical perspective. You've looked at the cells of the, what actually makes up the components of the food that we put into our mouth, the things that we think of as food. And
Right.
so your perspective is actually, I think, very important and isn't replicated very often. There's not a lot of people with it walking around with a nutritional biochemistry degree. So I think that for people listening here to actually maybe myth bust a little bit, do some education, your expertise is so valuable. And that's why I am teasing out some of those questions, because I think that this is important for people to understand.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, this is great. So thank you for saying all that stuff. Truth be told, let's go backwards. You're like, I read the Mastering Diabetes book a couple times. Please give yourself credit. I'll give credit where credit's due. You helped do a lot of the writing for the Mastering Diabetes book. Let's be honest about it. You helped do a lot of the editing. You helped do a lot of the wordsmithing, a lot of the proofreading, and a lot of the idea generation. So, even though your name is not on that book, that book would not be possible without you. Period. End of story. So give yourself a giant high five and a giant hug, because you were instrumental in creating that book. That being said, okay, let's talk about what are the things that people should care about, right? When you talk to people who are living with diabetes, you say the words insulin resistance and people are like, okay, cool, sweet. I understand what that means. I understand why it's relevant to me for the most part, right? But if you're talking to your average person that was never diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2, let's just call it like a 45-year-old man who might be 10 pounds overweight and wants to become more active, or a 52-year-old woman who might be diagnosed with low bone density and is struggling from low energy. You say the word insulin resistance and they're like, whatever, that doesn't pertain to me. Switch off, go do something else, right? So myth number 1, insulin resistance is only applicable to people with diabetes. False. Insulin resistance applies to literally every single human being. And it's way, way bigger than the world of diabetes. Okay. So that is something that I think I want every human being to know, right? I kid you not, you could be 6 years old. You could be normal weight. You could be an active young child playing soccer, and you could be living with insulin resistance, believe it or not, right? Because insulin resistance is inducible very quickly, and it can lead to all of the problems of diabetes, but that takes a long time. And even before diabetes is set in, or maybe you may never live with diabetes ever in your life, but you could still be living with insulin resistance and then all of the cascade of issues that come along with it. So that's number 1. Number 2, in the world of insulin resistance, people are always talking about sugar, carbs, carbs, sugar. It's like, it just drives me nuts that people cannot get out of this world that they think that insulin resistance or insulin has only one purpose in the human body, and it's all driven by and resulting into a glucose problem or a sugar problem or a carb problem, right? It is factually incorrect. Okay. Insulin resistance can certainly be caused by a diet that is high in refined carbohydrate energy, the cookies, the crackers, the chips, the pastas, the sodas, the sugar sweetened beverages, the snack foods, the things that you find in the center of the grocery store, the high fructose corn syrup laden products. Like all that stuff is nutritional napalm as far as I'm concerned. Okay. That stuff will absolutely cause insulin resistance. Don't get me wrong, but there's a better and more effective way to do it. And the way that you can do it quicker and more repeatably is by eating a diet that contains a high quantity of saturated fat. And that's a light bulb that most people are like, wait, what? What are you talking about? Fat? Insulin resistance has nothing to do with fat. It's all about carbs. And I'm like, well, you sure about that? How's that working out for you? Right. So one of the principles that we hammer home in the Mastering Diabetes book, and in one of the things that I got my entire graduate degree on, is that saturated fat is the culprit. It is literally the boogeyman that most people either don't know about or most people don't want to admit is responsible for many health problems, insulin resistance being one of them, but then also cardiovascular issues, number 2, specifically high LDL cholesterol and high blood pressure. Okay. All of that boils down to saturated fat. Okay. So that's one. That's number 1. That's number 2. And then number 3 is that insulin resistance is a form of inflammation. It is a form of whole body inflammation that you cannot feel. You cannot detect it. It is invisible. It is behind the scenes. Okay. It is not the type of inflammation that you get when you are trying to walk into a room and you stub your toe on the doorway and you're like, oh God, that is painful, right? That is acute inflammation. It's not the type of inflammation you get when you get a migraine and you're like, oh my God, I cannot see. My head is pounding. I have to turn the lights off and go to sleep. Okay. That is acute inflammation that feels very gnarly. Okay. This is a form of non-acute chronic inflammation that is behind the scenes that you literally cannot feel. And it's a form of inflammation that affects your liver, your muscle tissue, and your brain primarily. Those are the 3 target organs that it affects. And I'm going to throw your number 4, which is your pancreas, into the equation. Okay. So again, if we go back to principle number 1, which is that most people think that insulin resistance is only related to diabetes, that's wrong. Insulin resistance is related to everybody. And what makes it even more annoying is that it's so far behind the surface and you can't feel it that most people are just completely unaware that they are living with insulin resistance, and they maybe have been living with insulin resistance for like 10 to 20 to 30 years before all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. I got some problems and I think I want to try to solve them. So it's making sense?
Yes. And I can see Lauren taking notes. I know I have so many questions right now.
Go for it.
I want to go, you said far below the surface. I want to go below that surface in a way that you have all these answers now, but let's imagine that I am 42 years old. I just got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Everything they told me in the clinic makes me think that you're nuts.
Totally.
Because this is what I've been taught from my doctor, from my healthcare practitioner. Everybody gave me a low-carb food list and told me to go figure the rest out on my own.
Correct.
So I want to know from you, to get the answers to these complicated questions, although I think that we're getting to a point where we're starting to understand this link to food, which can really be simplified. Okay, we're talking about dietary fat here. Interesting. This is a new concept. But for you to get to this concept, you had to ask a lot of questions of yourself. And I'm curious, what was the initial motivation for you? Why in the heck did you want a super nerd in the first place to find all of these answers and take 5 years to get there? What was it?
Phenomenal question. Okay. I'll give you the simplest answer around. Because I felt like shit. Okay. Excuse my language, but I felt like shit. What happened was that I was diagnosed in the year 2002. Okay. And I was told the same thing. Eat a low carb diet. Carbs are bad for you. You're allergic to carbohydrates. Take this book, count your carbohydrates, try and eliminate them. No rice, no pastas, no potatoes, a small amount of fruit here and there. That's it. And I was like, cool, sweet. What does that mean? More red meat, more white meat, more fish, more chicken, more salmon, more turkey burgers, more peanut butter, more cheese. And I was like, cool, sweet. This is awesome. I love those foods. So I ate a whole bunch of them. And the promise was that my blood glucose would come down and my insulin use would stay nice and flat and nice and predictable on a daily basis. Now, most people who are not living with type 1 diabetes have no concept of just how hard it is to live with type 1 when your blood glucose is a disaster. It literally robs you of life. It takes everything away from you. You get frustrated when you see a high number on your blood glucose meter. So you get like emotionally annoyed. Then you get mad at yourself. And then you end up injecting what are called rage boluses, which are these really large boluses of insulin just because you're pissed off. And then before you know it, 2 hours later, your blood glucose is ridiculously low and you can't think clearly. Then you have to go eat a bunch of, glucose tabs or drink a bunch of orange juice in order to get your blood glucose back up. And guess what? It goes way too high again. And then you just get on this roller coaster. You go to sleep at night. You wake up in the middle of the night. Your blood glucose is at 350. You urinate like a fish, and then you go back to sleep and you're like, oh my God, I wish I could just end this entire thing. It sucks. It's garbage. And I lived like that for a year. But here's the thing. I'm a good boy. And I listen to what the doctors say. And I listen to the nutritionist. And I was like, hey, I'll do the low carb thing. Sounds like a plan. And I was trying to follow them to the best of my best of my ability because I didn't know anything. Right. But despite the fact that I was trying to be good and I was trying to really apply myself to set myself up for success, it just wasn't working. So my glucose was a disaster. My insulin use was climbing up. And I kid you not, I started using 25 units of insulin per day. And after a year, I was using 52 units of insulin per day. You freaking kidding me? My insulin use doubled in a year, even though my carbohydrate intake didn't change. You gotta be joking me. That right there was an indicator that something was wrong. And then in addition to that, I'm an athlete. I love using my body, right? And Kylie can tell you that. I wake up at 5:30 every single morning because I'm excited so I can go to the gym when it's dark and I can knock out a workout and then be back home before her and Indigo are even awake. Why? Because I love it. It's just it's what turns me on, And Lauren, you're a spin instructor. You're a ridiculous athlete yourself. You know the high that you get when you're exercising. I live for this stuff.
Well, yes, but most people don't know that I exercise the angry out because I had a similar experience as well, and I'm not over it yet.
She's rage exercising.
Yeah.
She stopped rage bolusing and she's now rage exercising.
Yeah. I don't believe for 1 second that anyone that's a cycling instructor like me does it because everything is perfect in their world. I am working the trauma out from experiences like you mentioned, because that 1 year of chasing blood sugar, of chasing your tail, I did 15 years of that. And for everyone to know, I didn't meet Cyrus to turn myself around, which is really interesting. If you ever, to look at our timelines put together in the early 2000s, is that I was coming across some of the same research that I think that Cyrus was finding as well, while he was accumulating his own research to get his own answers here into what in the heck is going on. And it took me a very long time to get validation for how and why I was lowering inflammation in my body. And that's why I'm so excited that you're going to talk about that, because the how and the why is this working is so hard to wrap our heads around. How in the hell are we eating twice the amount of carbohydrates and taking half as much insulin once we start to engage in different nutrition habits? And those are the ones that is what you came across in your studies, right? So when you're feeling like crap, you were ready to find a solution. And I'm willing to bet that you were going to go to the ends of the earth to figure out how to uncrap your body.
Uncrap. I want to start a
Uncrap
podcast.
yourself.
Uncrap yourself.
That sounds very Chuck Carroll, by the way.
Oh, it's so good. It's so true. Yeah. So on one hand, I would say, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that process, woe is you. But then on the other hand, I'm like, no, are you kidding me? It's the adversity that creates the opportunity for you to learn and then transform yourself and then go on to help other people. Right. So like, I'm happy that happened to you, and I'm happy it happened to me, and I'm happy it happened to Kylie when she went through endometriosis, because if she didn't, she would have not gained the knowledge and the experience to be able to go on and create this podcast and help, millions of other people. So like, it's necessary. It's necessary for all of us to go through our own junk and to get like walloped over the back of the head with a health condition that you never asked for. And then to be like, well, crap, what am I supposed to do about this?
We wouldn't have met without type 1, right? We wouldn't have met without our sweet little chronic conditions jumping on to
exactly right.
to us.
It's so true.
Exactly right.
So
and so to go back on that point, a lot of the times when people are like, oh, my son was just diagnosed with type 1, or, I just got diagnosed with hypertension from my doctor. Literally my first words are, congratulations. This is the greatest thing that ever happened to you. And people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, this is the greatest opportunity that you have in front of you right now. If you want to engage, right? If you want to be like Maverick from Top Gun, where you're like at the beginning scene of the movie where he's like trying to help, his wingman land his airplane because his wingman's like a little bit fried and, he like doesn't know, he can't see things properly. And then he ends up actually landing the plane, and then Maverick himself wigs out, right? It's like Maverick was wigging out for a little while, and then it was like, Maverick, are you there? Maverick, are you there? Maverick, and then all of a sudden, like, Maverick re-engages, he puts on his mask again, and then boom, he like re-engages and he's able to land the aircraft, right? So like, if you choose to engage in this process, you're likely to come across a new version of yourself that you've never even knew existed, right? And getting dealt the chronic disease card sucks at first. But once you emotionally process it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, hell yeah, this is awesome. This is the greatest excuse of all time.
Whenever I have a question for you, I'm going to say, talk to me, Goose.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
right.
yes, that is his language. That is his love language. Yeah. Look, with the aviators and everything.
They're crooked. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Tell me about insulin resistance. Tell me how to reverse inflammation. Tell me how to unbreak my heart.
Yeah.
Selena, you never close your eyes anymore when I kiss your lips. I shouldn't sing ever. I'm sorry.
Do.
Baby. People are like, this is the worst podcast I've ever listened to.
That's
no,
true.
these are the coolest people with type 1 diabetes
That's
here.
right.
Absolutely. Right. And here's the thing, it is my lot in life to love on people with type 1 diabetes. I firmly believe that. And also, Cyrus, the things that you're talking about, so you were experiencing this, like you wanted to uncrap yourself. So you're like, I feel terrible. I'm going to go figure out a way.
It literally sounds like I pooped in my pants, but I love it. Keep going.
Maybe you did. That could happen. With a high blood sugar, that could happen.
It's so true.
You never know. So you were, here you were, young man, just out of college, feeling terrible. And the thing that you were told to do, you did, which was eat this low carbohydrate diet, which, we talked about in our previous episode, Lauren, that food is not just one macronutrient. Food, when you were told to eat food, Cyrus, they said to eat a low carbohydrate diet, but all the food that you were eating had some proportion of carbohydrate, fat, and protein.
Correct.
So you ended up discovering along the way that this dietary strategy, this low carbohydrate strategy, had other implications and was making you feel terrible, and your blood glucose was incredibly unmanageable. Tell us what you thought of your blood glucose meter.
Oh yeah. I developed a love-hate relationship with my blood glucose meter. I loved to hate that thing because it always gave me a stupid number. And then I got to a certain point where I was like, you know what? I hate you so much that I'm going to throw you against a wall and shatter you into 100 pieces and then fall onto the couch and start crying. That was my low point.
Yeah. And, you decided to take a different approach, and you found somebody, you decided to engage with the food you're putting in your body, the nutrition, and you followed an approach with somebody named Doug Graham. He's also a big deal in the nutrition world, and decided to flip the dietary approach, really.
Right.
You basically went from a very low carbohydrate intake to a very high nutrient dense carbohydrate intake from a whole food plant-based approach that was rich
Correct.
in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and beans and legumes. Mostly fruits and vegetables, though. And
Mhm.
what happened?
Okay. My entire life changed in a very short period of time for the better, and it was one of the most powerful learning experiences I've ever had in this life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to go back to what you were saying a second ago here, um, every piece of food that you put into your mouth that comes from the natural world
Mm-hmm.
contains carbohydrate and fat and protein. Those are the three macronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if it comes from the natural world, it also contains vitamins and minerals and fiber and water and antioxidants and phytochemicals. Okay. So again, carbohydrate, fat, protein, those are the three macronutrients. And then the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Okay. Phytochemicals is just basically plant compounds. All right. So human beings, we like to create narratives and we like to create our own vocabulary about subjects. And when we talk about a specific collection of foods, we're like, oh, those are the low carb foods, right? So we take all the nutritional complexity that exists inside of a whole collection of foods and we use one word to describe it or one term to describe it. And we call it quote unquote low carb foods, right? Versus, if we were to take a look at a whole collection of other fruits and vegetables and, what we talk about in the world of, diabetes and insulin resistance reversal, we refer to that as low fat, plant-based whole foods. Again, it's like a cryptic term that like we invented so that we can, try and make it understandable. But the food itself, like if the food could talk, the food would be like, oh, you dumb humans, like you don't know what you're talking about, right? Like I am so much more complex than your silly language could ever communicate. It's unfortunate that you can't really fully understand what's inside of me. That's literally the way that like that's what food would say to us if it could talk, right? So that's why whenever I'm like trying to think about food, I try in my head not to label, eggs as an example as like a low carb food, right? Because there's a whole universe of complexity inside of just the egg itself. And we have to be able to talk about, the macronutrients and the micronutrients together in order for us to understand more information about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not until we get to that level of like really understanding that food is complex that we can start to have a more holistic picture, a more like bird's eye view of how specific foods can actually interact with your body and, either promote chronic disease or get rid of chronic disease.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question before, what happened to me? So I basically switched over from eating a low carbohydrate diet to eating a low fat, plant-based whole food diet. I literally became a fruitarian in the year 2003 because I was working with a guy named Dr. Doug Graham, who literally saved my life. And I owe him a lot. And he basically brought me into the new world and was like, hey, by the way, this whole low carbohydrate thing that you've been doing, how's that working out for you? And I was like, well, that's not working out for me. That's why I'm consulting with you. That's why I asked for you to help me. And he was like, cool, you're done. You're done eating that low carbohydrate diet as of, I don't know, 5 minutes ago. Okay. From here on out, no more of those foods. What you're going to eat are a bunch of fruits and a bunch of vegetables. Do you choose to engage or not? And I was like, well, if it makes me feel better, cool. If I get more energy, cool. If my blood glucose comes down, cool. If my insulin use comes down, cool. And he goes, all right, strap on your seatbelt, cowboy. Just wait. Just wait to see what happens. So I was with him for a week at like a in-person sports camp. And during that week, actually during the first 24 hours, by following his methodology of eating a low fat plant-based whole food diet, AKA eating fruits and vegetables, my blood glucose fell so hard, meaning my relatively high blood glucose that was uncontrollable up in the 160s and 180s and 200s and 220s, all of a sudden just started to come down and down and down so much that I had to start backing off on the amount of insulin I was giving myself because I was now ODing on insulin.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So like I was telling you that I had started at 25 units of insulin. I was up to like 50 units of insulin. And that 50 units of insulin now was way too powerful. So in a week with working with him, I went from eating approximately 100 grams of carbohydrate per day to 600 grams of carbohydrate per day. So I 6x'd my carbohydrate intake which is nuts if you're living with type 1. Okay. So that's a big change. And I was expecting that my insulin use would also go up. It would go up by like 2x or 3x or 4x, maybe 6x. And before I knew it, I was expecting that I'd be injecting 150 units of insulin per day. But guess what happened? I ate 6x as many carbohydrates, but my insulin use went down. It went from, 50 units all the way down to 42, down to 37, down to 32. And by the time I left 7 days later, I was using 26 units of insulin per day. And my blood glucose was more controllable. I had more energy. I was better hydrated. I was sleeping better. I was urinating more frequently. And I was just like, holy crap, this is insane. Right. And that was my entrance. That was like me walking through a doorway into a wormhole of like complete awesomeness that continued to unfold over the course of many years. Right. And so I saw a rapid change in my blood glucose metabolism, AKA an increase in my insulin sensitivity. I was so sensitive to insulin that I could use less of it. My body was so sensitive. Go ahead.
Right. So basically that means that every unit of insulin that you put inside of your body was actually much more effective and worked more efficiently because you had changed the environment in the inside of your cells.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if we want to get like super nerdy about, the numbers here, when I started on my low carbohydrate diet, I would have to inject approximately 1 unit of insulin per 2 grams of carbohydrate that entered my mouth. Okay. 1 unit of insulin per 2 grams. So if I was eating 100 grams of carbohydrate per day, that means I needed approximately 50 units of insulin, somewhere in that ballpark. Okay. By the time I left Doug Graham's retreat, 7 days after starting a fruitarian, adventure, my insulin sensitivity went from 2 to 1 to 28 to 1. I was now using 1 unit of insulin per 28 grams of carbohydrate. That's a 14-fold change. That's a big effing deal in a very short period of time, right? And so now I was eating something like 600 grams of carbohydrate for 25 units of insulin, approximately 25 units of insulin. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes I would eat 650 grams of carbohydrate for 25 units of insulin. So more carbs, less insulin, right? Which goes against, to your point, Lauren. You said, well, if somebody who's 42 years old got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, they would look at me and they would say that guy's a quack, right? And you're right. They would definitely look at me and say I'm a quack because the things that I'm saying are going against what the ADA writes in their medical journals. And it's going against what the majority of the endocrinology world says is the way to control blood glucose living with type 1 or any form of diabetes, right? But guess what? The old school method of lowering carbohydrate, it can work. It can certainly help you lower your blood glucose and keep your blood glucose nice and flat. And it can certainly help you lower your A1C value. Okay. But I want people to understand that if they choose to eat a low carbohydrate diet and they are successful at it, which there are millions of people around the world that do it, and they're all over social media talking about how badass they are, my hat's off to you. This is great. But here's the problem. What they're not recognizing is that by eating a low carbohydrate diet, they actually are increasing the amount of inflammation inside of their liver and inside of their muscle tissue and inside of their kidney and inside of their brain on a daily basis. They just can't feel it. And what that means is that 5 years into the future, 10 years into the future, maybe 30 years into the future, they're not going to be very happy with themselves because they're going to have eaten themselves into more chronic disease, even though they couldn't detect it in the short term. Is this making sense?
Yeah. And I just want to add to that. What we'll see in the endocrine world with the ADA, with the diabetes professionals, is we will see acknowledgement of the research of plant-based nutrition as an option for all people with diabetes. But the big explanation for why and how it can be so effective doesn't necessarily come across strong, and it certainly doesn't come across strong enough in initial teachings when people do get diagnosed. The acknowledgement of preventive practices through nutrition just does not come across strong enough. The one measurement that we've had for a very long time is that we see that complication risk is reduced at an A1C of 7%, particularly in type 1 diabetes. Hit that 7% and you've reduced your risk. But what about prevention. Why don't we want to prevent these things from happening in the first place? How do we actually give ourselves an enriched life, an enriched cellular structure, rather than kind of like chasing a problem or just waiting for one to arise?
Correct.
So that A1C becomes secondary to the stuff that we're putting in our bodies to try to prevent these things from happening in the first place. There just isn't enough of this kind of lifting up of people with diabetes to say, here's how we can really get our hands into something, and you do it with every single meal that you eat. So I think you and I are 2 for 2 on feeling absolutely outraged by how is this working? Like, go plant-based. This sounds completely asinine, but I've got nothing left. I've done everything.
Correct.
And I can tell you how many consults I have where I hear someone, I ask, what's your nutrition history like? Why are you seeing me? Well, I've done paleo, I've done keto, I've done low carb, and I just can't get leaner, or I just can't get my A1C down anymore. Now I don't know what to do. And the one thing that people don't do is go high nutrient value, nutrient rich, get the plants in your body. Why are people so terrified of this? Where is this coming from?
Very well said. Very well said. It's shocking. It's like once you've entered the matrix, you're like, how come the rest of the world can't see that this is the matrix? This is what it looks and feels like, right? But when you're not out, when you've never gone inside the matrix, you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, right? And it's not until you actually get inside of it and feel it and see the effect that it has on your blood glucose meter and your energy level and your ability to sleep and your mental health, that all of a sudden you're like, oh crap. Why did I not know about this when I was 5? Because I would have done it.
Right. So what we're saying right now, folks, is take the green pill.
Please.
Take the green pill.
Yeah, Morpheus here. Morpheus here with his glasses. Well, and you guys are talking. Okay, so one thing that I'm just going to bring up here is that, I don't have insulin dependent diabetes. I don't live with that myself, but I've worked with so many people who have, and I've seen blood glucose patterns and CGM, reports. And I've seen you guys both sharing your blood glucose values. When you're monitoring your blood glucose, you're getting sometimes sometimes minutes a minute detailed data on what's happening inside of your body and what's happening kind of at that cellular level. For those people who may be listening who aren't living with diabetes, there are the biomarkers we talked about in terms of like nutritional awareness, right? That we were talking about last month, and heart health in terms of, monitoring blood pressure, monitoring lipid panels, things like that. But Cyrus, you earlier referenced to inflammation and insulin resistance, that there's this connection there that, and again, when you're looking at we can geek out on diabetes all day, but if you're somebody who doesn't have diabetes or is concerned about your risk for diabetes or other types of chronic disease, Cyrus, you've mentioned chronic disease already. You've mentioned inflammation. Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Yep.
And if you're not somebody looking at your blood glucose meter to understand, first of all, the blood glucose meter will give you very clear information. For sure. Right. So you guys have the benefit of that. But for those of us who don't have that daily benefit, how do we learn that this is also part of our life? How do we learn that insulin resistance exists in all of us?
Yeah.
As a nutritional effect when we're not eating the correct foods, right? Or when we're eating foods that are going to lead to insulin resistance.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had the answer, honestly. I've been thinking about this a lot. Part of the reason why insulin resistance is such a pain in the butt is because there's no insulin resistance device. It's not like you can take your iPhone and download an app and then be like, how insulin resistant am I? Or take this and scan your body and be like, oh, look, I'm a high insulin resistance, right? We got all these sleep devices and these blood pressure monitors and heart rate monitors and, Oura rings that tell you everything you ever wanted to know about your heart rate variability and your sleeping patterns and beyond. But yet this thing called insulin resistance is, again, it's hidden. It's behind the surface. You can't feel it. You can't detect it. You can't measure it. So it's like, well, awesome. What am I supposed to do about it? Right? How do I know? What number am I, Cyrus? Am I low? Am I medium? Am I high? What am I? What am I? Right? And so eventually I think we'll get to a point in the medical world where we can measure it more effectively. But for the time being, a simple way to think about it is through a lot of work with many people, digging through the research and then also experimenting on myself a lot. It has become abundantly clear to me that there is a magical cutoff of total fat intake on a daily basis that exists, that is somewhere between approximately 30 grams per day and 40 grams per day. And when you eat a diet that contains more than, call it 30 to 40 grams per day of total fat, you enter into the world of insulin resistance. And when you are eating less than approximately 30 or 40 grams per day, you are entering into the world of insulin sensitivity. Okay. Why 30 to 40 grams? I don't know. I didn't come up with it, but that's just what I've empirically measured. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to put it out there that just so that we're clear, one whole avocado, a medium avocado, has about 22 grams of fat.
There you go.
And I'm just looking this up here real quick. I'm looking at 12-ounce portion of porterhouse steak has 18 grams of fat. A T-bone with 12-ounce portion has 39 grams of fat.
Okay. Do 2 eggs.
Okay.
What's that?
I think that's 10 to 12.
Yeah.
10 to 12. Okay. How about last one would be 2 tablespoons of oil, of olive oil. That's the kicker right there.
28.
28. Boom, right there. Okay. So a little bit goes a long way, right? I never started my career to be like a fat detective, but I've come to learn that it just has a very powerful effect. And so if you can try and limit your fat intake to, less than approximately 30 to 40 grams per day, we'll call it 35 grams per day, then you're going to be putting yourself in a very insulin sensitive environment. And that's a good thing for you. Okay. So that's number one. Now, number two, insulin sensitivity also goes way beyond just your total fat intake, right? That's just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's many other things that factor into it. Number two, the single most powerful nutrient that exists in the world of food. It rhymes with fiber.
Fiber. Our favorite F word.
It's my favorite.
My favorite.
Okay. So I have come to learn over the course of time that fiber is probably the Superman of the nutrition world. And I never used to believe that was the case, but I can argue it from like 700 different perspectives. When you consume a fiber-rich diet, it does so many things, so many positive things for you. Number one, it slows the rate at which glucose is absorbed into your into your blood. So effectively, you eat food that contains fiber. It travels down your esophagus. It gets inside of your small intestine. In your small intestine is where the bulk of all the nutrient digestion occurs, right? When fiber is present, then the enzymes that are acting on all that food to try and extract the glucose and the amino acids and the fatty acids and put it into your blood, the glucose is the fiber is there to just literally complicate the whole picture. It just makes it hard for the enzymes in your small intestine to do their job. And you might think to yourself, well, like, why would I want that? I don't want my small intestine to have a difficult time. And the answer is no, you do. You absolutely do, because time is a good thing. You want your food to digest slowly because that prevents against rapid rises in blood glucose, rapid rises in blood lipids, rapid rises in insulin production. Okay. So slow is good. And fiber is a brake that slows down all of the nutrient digestion and absorption processes. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, fiber, you cannot digest fiber as a human being. It is impossible. You do not produce the enzyme called cellulase, which is required to break down the cellulose. Okay. Now, factoid, most people don't know this, but fiber, there's many different versions of fiber. There's many different flavors. It comes in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are linear. Some of them are branch chain. Some of them are very complicated branch chains and beyond. Okay. But fiber is 100% glucose. It is glucose attached to glucose, attached to glucose, attached to glucose, attached to glucose, so on and so forth. Okay. So when you consume fiber, you're actually taking on a bunch of glucose, but here's the problem. The fiber is literally inaccessible to you. because you don't manufacture cellulase. So why is that a good thing? Okay. The reason it's a good thing is because we can't digest it. It acts as a brake. It slows everything down, but then it gets passed into your large intestine. And in your large intestine, you have 38 trillion bacteria. And these bacteria do manufacture cellulase. And they are the ones that have the right, if you will, the right metabolic pair of scissors to cut this very long and complicated chain of glucose molecules into individual pieces. So these bacteria go, oh, look, I got the scissors, cut, and then they eat the glucose, cut, and then they eat the glucose, cut, and then they use the glucose basically for energy. And then when they're using it for energy and they're able to stay alive, they then make a copy of themselves and they go make another, they make a daughter cell, and then that cell makes a daughter cell and so on and so forth. And they proliferate and then they colonize your large intestine and they help that process basically causes your large intestine to become much more powerful in its ability to metabolize fiber-rich foods. Okay. Number 3, inside of your large intestine, not only are your microbes using those glucose molecules for themselves to replicate and then to stay alive, but they also use that to manufacture these magical molecules called short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids are ridiculously powerful. You can think of them as like fertilizer for almost every single tissue inside of your body. Okay, now the reason why they're so powerful is because these short-chain fatty acids, when they're manufactured inside of your small intestine, they get put into your blood. And once they're put inside of your blood, they have access to literally every single tissue. And when they get inside of your blood, they start to circulate and use your blood as like a conduit to get to everywhere, every tissue, okay? So in your gut, it helps to maintain the integrity of the epithelial layer, the single cell layer, and it keeps your gut functioning very nicely. In your colon, which is the next downstream location, they are actually one of the primary energy sources for colonocytes, and they help lower your risk for colon cancer. That's a really good thing. In your brain, they help to maintain the integrity of your brain, your blood-brain barrier. And that's a really good thing because the more effective your blood-brain barrier is, the less likely you are to end up with brain inflammation. In your pancreas, these short-chain fatty acids, they actually stimulate insulin production. In your liver, they can increase gluconeogenesis and they can increase glycogen synthesis. Don't worry about that. Point is that they can directly affect metabolic processes that are involved in glucose metabolism. And then in your muscle, these short chain fatty acids actually make you more insulin sensitive because they help your muscles absorb glucose when it is present. So it's almost like these short chain fatty acids do so much for you, and it all happens indirectly via your gut. All right. So that's a long-winded way of me saying, if you want to decrease inflammation in your body, okay, don't go take Tylenol. Don't go take Advil because number one, I think those are anti-inflammatory medications that work on acute inflammation. We're talking about chronic inflammation that affects many different tissues. A way to do it is by ingesting foods that are fiber rich. For all the benefits that I just described, that's the tip of the iceberg. And then it manufactures short chain fatty acids, which acts as fertilizer for the rest of your body. Okay. So I'll stop. Did I answer your question?
Did he answer your question, Kylie? Every question in the Fiber Bible has been covered, potentially. I just wanted to think in terms of, if this is all new, the short chain fatty acids seem to be key to healing a lot of things inside of the body. And short chain fatty acids, from what I gather, only come from fiber rich foods.
Correct.
So that 18-ounce T-bone is only going to drop, 39 grams of fat in the bucket. And then what happens?
Yeah. Like, what are the foods that are, like, then what happens, but also what are the foods that are the fiber-rich foods?
Okay, cool. So let's try and complete this whole concept of like macronutrients and fiber and beyond. Okay, so if we take one step backwards here, the macronutrients, most people think that there's 3 macronutrients. There's actually 4. Okay, carbohydrate, fat, protein. Those are the ones we care about. The 4th one, alcohol. Most people don't know that alcohol is a macronutrient. Technically speaking, it is. We just don't really talk about it because you don't really eat alcohol. It's not part of food. You know, you have to do a whole bunch of stuff in order to get a liquid that's alcoholic. Long story short, the reason why it's considered a macronutrient is because you will gain energy. It contains energy that turns into ATP. Okay. The vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals do not turn into ATP. They have other functions. And as a result of that, they're considered micronutrients because you cannot gain energy from them. Okay. So what I have spent the bulk of the last 20 years uncovering, and you guys know this very well, which is that when you eat a diet that is low in fat, ideally less than 30 to 35 grams of fat per day, total fat, low in fat, plant-based, meaning mostly from the plant world, and then whole foods, meaning from foods that don't require any processing or minimal processing. Okay. Low fat, plant-based whole foods. When you eat that type of diet, your health can improve in tremendous ways. It can lower your blood glucose. It can lower your blood pressure very quickly, very quickly. I'm talking within the first week to 2 weeks. And we've seen a lot of people, you know, you guys have seen these people with me that are highly medicated on antihypertensive medication, right? They're using 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 or 4 different hypertensive medications. And then they start eating a low fat, plant-based whole food diet. And all of a sudden their cardiovascular system becomes significantly more efficient. And the arterial plaque that has developed inside of their arteries over the course of many years begins to decrease by just a little bit, just enough that makes their blood vessels just a little bit more flexible. That then lowers their blood pressure so that when they wake up in the morning and they check their blood pressure, instead of looking at a number of 160 over 130, they now look at a number of 130 over 95, right? And these changes, these are relatively big changes, can happen in a very short period of time. Again, low fat, plant-based, whole food is the key. When it comes to LDL cholesterol, there's this, you guys have probably seen this, there's this massive war that's happening in the world of social media about whether LDL is causative in heart disease. Okay. The ketogenic world and the low carbohydrate world loves to argue that LDL cholesterol does not matter, that LDL cholesterol does not predict whether or not you're likely to have a cardiac event in the future, and that it doesn't actually provide any valuable information about your cardiovascular disease risk. The plant-based world says, are you joking? Are you reading the evidence? Are you taking a look at the meta-analysis that have studied millions of people over the course of time that have definitively demonstrated that LDL cholesterol is absolutely implicated in heart disease risk and that you should absolutely pay attention to your LDL cholesterol? Okay. And it's like all day long, every single day, no matter where you go, TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, people are just arguing back and forth, and there's debates, and it's just like, it's just absurd. Okay. So I've read a lot of this literature myself to try and, you know, open my mind and say, you know, does LDL actually matter? Does it matter? And the more that I read, the more that I realize that not only does LDL matter, LDL is very, very important for understanding your heart disease risk. But beyond LDL, there's also another biomarker called ApoB, which is apolipoprotein B, which measures effectively, you know, the atherogenic particles, the problematic particles inside of your blood. And it gives you a more comprehensive view of those bad boys. But long story short is that when you eat a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet, not only does your blood glucose come down, not only does your A1C come down, not only does your blood pressure come down, but your LDL cholesterol can come down very quickly, as can your ApoB. And then you have this thing called C-reactive protein, which is a marker of chronic inflammation. That comes down significantly. And then here's the kicker. Most people end up losing weight without even trying. You guys have seen this over and over and over again. You guys have coached hundreds of people, correct me if I'm wrong, that eat this way and they're like, oh crap, I just lost 9 pounds last month. I just lost 16 pounds in the last 2 months. what the hell is happening to me? I'm not even trying and I can't keep this weight on anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Am I wrong? Have you guys seen that?
Absolutely. Time and again.
Time and again.
Yeah, I think of it as metabolic efficiency is kind of magical. And that domino effect of look what happens when you flip your nutrition around. You're flipping those macronutrients around, right? Just like you had talked about. Essentially, even if someone isn't following a labeled diet being low carb or high fat, once we kind of look at what that looks like, someone's been tracking their nutrition for a couple of days and it dawns on them, even if they didn't know what they were taking in, we have to know, how are you eating now so that we can help you reverse this thing, that thing meaning insulin resistance. How can we help you reverse this? And even those small changes that start to get the ball rolling, they excite people so much when they start to see their fasting blood sugar change, or you see that your blood pressure is starting to go down, whatever biomarker you're looking at because of whatever diagnosis that you had, just a little bit of that encouragement can just domino. And when you said, certainly feeling like crap, uncrapping your body, is that the minute you discover that you're operating more efficiently, the first thing that people notice is they feel different. It's not even a number necessarily. Tell me how you feel today. It's only been a week or two. What's going on? Maybe I have more energy. And if people are tracking, like, what's your energy level right now? Ask yourself, 1 out of 5. Well, on most days, I'm kind of like a 2. I want to take a nap at 3 o'clock every single day. People like Kylie and I are going to ask you, what are you eating in the morning before you get to 3 o'clock? And we start to uncover some things from that. But then we say, here are just a few things you can start to change. This isn't all or nothing. Just give it a little go with what you're comfortable with. And maybe that's enough to start to shift the scale, the literal scale, or just your energetic scale. So a couple of weeks later, think about it for yourself. Are you coming up on a 4 or a 5 in energy? You don't need to nap anymore at the end of the day.
Right.
Just because you added a smoothie and you took away 8 ounces worth of beef. I mean, these little things can create so much excitement for someone. It starts to get the ball rolling in a direction that you just want to see more of what happens. And I'm willing to bet, Cyrus, that when you discovered this, and your insulin levels were cut down so much so quickly that you didn't just eat plants. You were probably still exercising at your norm, weren't you? At your normal intensity? Or did you pull the exercise back so you could just measure the effect of the plants?
Neither. I exercised more, not because I was trying to see how far I could lower my blood glucose and how much less insulin I could use. I exercised more because I had more energy and I was excited to use my body. And I was excited that my body just didn't hurt as much. I mean, at the age of 22, I was literally I felt like I had rigor mortis. I was like, what the hell is happening to me? And then all of a sudden I started eating this way and my joints felt looser and my muscles didn't need to be stretched all day, every day. And I was like, hell yeah. And I got on my bike and I started riding it into the sunset, for like 60, 70, 80 miles at a stretch. Cause I was like, I'm back, baby. I'm freaking back. Right. So
it's that double whammy. You what do I do with this energy?
Yes.
And so many people have no idea what that feels like. And I think our great big message here in general with Green Glow is you do not have to be stuck there. You don't have to be trapped there. If you haven't taken measures into the lifestyle strategies that we're talking about, you have a good problem. That's a good problem to have. If you have not walked into that world, not only does the research exist, but there are tools to help move you in that direction. So I think that just the motivation of what you're saying, all the science is exhausting, but the motivating factor of that is that you have nothing to lose but weight. You have nothing to lose but insulin resistance. You have nothing to lose but maybe this dark shadow that's constantly hovering over you because you don't feel good. Imagine losing some of that stuff because you have more short chain fatty acids doing the work for you.
You said it very well. You said it very well. And it's so true. Like, again, once you step into the matrix, you're like, oh, this feels good. This is kind of cool. Right. But you never know unless you're sort of like tiptoeing on the outside. And I realized that the lifestyle that we're suggesting takes a lot of effort and it takes, time and it takes a lot of determination to actually execute and be consistent with. right? So there's like almost two different approaches you can take. Approach number one is like the cold turkey approach, where you're like, all right, what I'm doing doesn't work. All right, I'm going to close this door and I'm going to open a new door and I'm going to change like 40 things at one time. And I'm going to be very uncomfortable, but I'm going to love it. And I'm going to just stick with it. Right. That's what I did. Right. Because that's kind of the way my brain works. And I know that about myself. So when I took the cold turkey approach back in 2003, I was like, cool, whatever. I don't care how uncomfortable this is, because the uncomfortability, the lack of convenience in my life right now is way less important than the increase in health that I'm feeling. I'll take that any day of the week. I will inconvenience myself to the moon if it makes me feel better. I don't care, right? So that's option number one, is go cold turkey. Option number two is to tiptoe. And you can tiptoe by making these microscopic gradual changes and saying, okay, I'm going to change my breakfast this month. And I'm going to tweak this little thing. And then eventually I'm going to change my lunch. And then eventually I'm going to get rid of eggs. And then eventually I'm going to start walking. And then eventually I'm going to start intermittent fasting. And that could take 6 months. It could take a year. It could take 2 years. And that is okay. You are absolutely welcome to take that approach if you want. That's actually the approach that we recommend people take, because otherwise you can get overwhelmed and then you can say, it's too much, it's too hard. I want to go back to my old ways. Right. So, if you're listening to this and thinking to yourself like, oh God, these guys are like, these guys are rugged and it's either all or nothing. The answer is no, it's not all or nothing. Like, you eventually get to a point where it feels like it's all or nothing, but how you get there is totally up to you. So don't stress yourself out if you're sitting here listening, being like, oh my God, I don't want to have to give up all this stuff. And I like chicken nuggets and I don't want to do this. It's like, it's okay. It's okay. Just take a deep breath and just start making one change. Take a look at your fiber intake and say, oh, I'm only eating 30 grams of fiber per day. What if I ate 40 grams for the next week? What if I substituted that turkey burger that I eat in the morning for a bowl of oatmeal, right? Tiny, microscopic, atomic habits, as James Clear writes, and then compound those over the course of time. Okay. It's really the compounding effect that I have come to learn is one of the most powerful things. The eighth wonder of the world. That's what, Warren Buffett, I think, likes to say this. Compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Right. And the reason they say that in the financial world is because if you have $10 and you put it in a bank account and then you earn interest on that, and then you earn interest on it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And over the course of 50 years, that $10 is going to turn into some, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you're compounding interest upon itself over and over and over again. The exact same thing happens in the world of health, right? If you make one good choice today and then you live that choice out, and then you make another good choice on top of that, and then another good choice on top of that, and you live that out for 20 years, well, guess what? You're going to feel like $1 million. And it's not going to take you 20 years to feel like $1 million. You're going to start to feel it quickly. But by the time you get 20 years into the future, you're going to be like, oh my Lord, this feels incredible.
What it sounds like you're saying is that you're coming back from the future to tell us, just like Dr. Columbus Batiste also, he said he talks to his patients like he's from the future. I'm from the future.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And says, in 20 years from now, we want you feeling your best. And this is the time. This is the time to add those fiber-rich foods to build those short-chain fatty acids in your colon. Like, have your colon do your work for you. This is the time. And there's so many conditions. We haven't even really named the chronic conditions that are, driven by inflammation and insulin resistance. But, the heart diseases, the hypertension, type 2 diabetes,
chronic kidney disease, fatty liver disease, Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline, thyroid dysfunction. The list goes on.
Insulin resistance is rooted to all of these things. Cancer. There's so many food. Yep. Now we're seeing, not even now. I mean, we've known for many, many, many years that processed meats will lead to cancer. They are type 1 carcinogenics, yet here they are serving hot dogs in elementary schools. I mean, at ballparks, all these places. So this is not new information. This was very well documented, well studied, well shown back in the 90s. So the fact that we are still subjected to poor information when it comes to nutrition and health and long-term health and the prevention of disease is something that is unfortunately a very tragic part of our US experience. But the reality is that there's a lot of people out there who are trying to change that narrative. And we happen to be, you know, Cyrus, you happen to be one of those people. Lauren and I happen to be people who fall in that line. And, you know, prevention of chronic disease and chronic is possible. And so if you're somebody like us who's wondering, like, well, what is the impact of every bite I take, right? Every bite I take could be killing me.
Oh no. Good one.
Or it could help. It just depends on the fiber.
You guys are great.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I had to go there.
this is good. You mentioned Superman earlier, feeling like a Superman.
Mhm.
And I just couldn't help but have kind of the like a corny saying go through my head. And it wasn't behind every Superman is a superwoman. It's in front of every Superman is
Mhm.
a superwoman eating 40 grams of fiber a day.
Mhm.
So for those that are listening, ladies, we're talking to you. Get your fiber on.
Yeah.
Get your leafy greens up. Get going. Get walking. Do it for yourself. Be selfish. Please
Mhm.
be selfish about your food choices. You deserve that.
Mhm.
Take the green pill and walk with us.
Mhm.
Get us in your ears, and we are doing it together. We've got a recipe on our website that is amazing. There will be more recipes to come to help you increase your fiber needs. We will accompany this conversation with a blog on our website also for you to gather a little bit more information
Mhm.
on all of this science that we have dropped on you today. Hopefully it's been fun and it's been exciting and you're like, whoa, I'm revved up. How do I get those short chain fatty acids? Whoa, can I get your grocery list? And we could help you with that too. So greenglowlifestyle.com, that's where you can find us, and Facebook at Green Glow Lifestyle,
Lifestyle.
and on Instagram at Green Glow Podcast. We're taking them all.
Mhm. We
You're
are.
monopolizing. Can we, before we depart, can we talk about the Indian gooseberry? Because
Of course. Yeah.
this bad boy blows my mind. Go ahead.
I want to hear more about that.
Okay.
I've got
The
5
reason why I
minutes.
wanted to bring it up, 5 minutes. Okay, cool. The reason why I want to bring it up in the first place is because um, we are bombarded with lots of information about nutrition, you know, from social media, and you get these like, you know, articles in the New York Times trying to tell you that like goji berries are good for you and acai berries are the next big thing. And, you know, a lot of that information about these like quote unquote anti-inflammatory foods or these medicinal plants, like it's all good information. Don't get me wrong, right? And it helps people wake up to the idea that there are plants that have unusually high antioxidant power. Okay, unusually high anti-inflammatory power. So I was intrigued by this back in the year like 2012 or so when I was first learning about foods that have anti-inflammatory power, and I started deep diving into try and research, you know, what else besides goji berries and like what makes them so good, right? And as I went deeper and deeper and deeper, I started to realize that there are many foods that are like way more powerful than the goji berry, and there's foods that are way more powerful than the acai berry, and there's foods that are way more powerful than turmeric. But yet those are the ones that are talked about frequently, and those are the ones that get the limelight, right? Now, one of the foods that doesn't get the limelight, I think nearly as much as it should, is the Indian gooseberry, aka the amla berry, AMLA berry. The reason is because, okay, there's a thing called the ORAC value. Okay, the ORAC value stands for ORAC, oxygen radical absorbance capacity value. It's a very super nerd nutritional biochemistry way of talking about the antioxidant power of a food. So if you were a scientist and you're like, oh, let's compare the goji berry versus the Indian gooseberry, what you would do is you would go into a laboratory and you would put the food through a laboratory experiment, and then it would spit out the ORAC value. Okay, and the ORAC value is basically like a score that says this is either low, medium, or high, right? So if you take a look at the ORAC scale, you look at the goji berries and they end up with an ORAC value of like 3,000. And you're like, oh, wow, that sounds like a big number, right? And then you go and you test, cranberries and you'll get an ORAC value in the 10,000s. And then you'll test cacao powder and that has an ORAC value of 55,000. And you're like, holy crap, that's pretty badass. And then you take a look at turmeric and turmeric has 127,000 on the ORAC scale. And you're like, damn, no wonder everybody's talking about turmeric. That's great. And then you test the Indian gooseberry. The Indian gooseberry, 261,500 on the ORAC scale. Okay. It's the single most powerful food in the world, single most powerful antioxidant rich whole food ever discovered by human beings. But like 7 people have ever heard of this food. And that doesn't make any sense. Right. So when I first heard about these things, I was like, damn, how come these things aren't really talked about? So I went and I ordered a bunch of stuff off of Amazon and I started to eat them, or I tried to eat them. And my Lord, are they impossible to eat. Kylie has tried them as well, right? Yeah. This is very popular in the Indian, in the world of, in the Indian world because
and Ayurvedic, nutrition, Ayurvedic nutrition.
And Ayurvedic nutrition as well. And they have juices, they have freeze-dried berries, they have frozen berries, they have powders, you name it. So we got all these products and we started eating them and I was like, oh, this is why nobody talks about them. These things are, you can't eat them. They're disgusting, right? They're like so sour that like even getting them close to your face makes you pucker up and like your nose, it's like worse than wasabi. You know, that feeling that you get where you like your whole nose is on fire. So I think that's the main reason why nobody really talks about them because they're just like impossible. So I took it upon myself to say, all right, well, is there a way to make this thing actually taste good? So Kylie and myself and some friends of ours in San Francisco, we went into Chinatown and we were like, let's go see if there's like some ingredients that we can add to this that we can like use to blend together and try and find a way to make this thing actually palatable. And we ended up going into a tea shop and we talked with this guy who was like a green tea, black tea, white tea master. This guy was like a tea shaman. And he basically explained to us, he's like, oh yeah, cool. If you want to try and cut the flavor of this, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but you could try and use these teas. You could try and use this. You could try and use this. And so we just, played, scientific experiment in our kitchen. And it turns out that if you use oolong dark green tea, oolong cuts the flavor of the amla berry and all of a sudden it tastes not so shitty anymore. And then from that moment onwards, we ended up, that was the first flavor. And then we ended up creating a tea product that's basically the ground the ground amla berry mixed with oolong. That was version number 1. And then we ended up making a hibiscus version that had hibiscus and mint and cinnamon and ginger. And then we made an elderberry version that had elderberry, mint and cinnamon and ginger and beyond. So now we have this whole product lineup. And the reason I'm talking about this in the first place is because the Indian gooseberry is an absurd medicinal superfood. It is absurd. I wish everybody knew about this. It can lower blood pressure. It can lower blood glucose. It can lower cholesterol. It's the single most powerful cholesterol reducing food in the world. It's the single most powerful anti-inflammatory food in the world. I've been using it now for the better part of 7 years. And we created this company 7 years ago. It's called Amla Green. And we started selling this stuff and tried to see if people were interested in it. And it has gotten like a pretty big fan following now, which is awesome. But the reason why it's important is because so many people are seeing such profound differences and using it as one of the tools inside of their arsenal to help lower their blood pressure and their blood cholesterol and their blood glucose. And then there's all these ancillary benefits that come along for the ride. Okay. Recently, over the past year, I've had a lot of musculoskeletal inflammation inside of my back and inside of my shoulder and beyond. And I happened to just up my dose of Amla Green on a whim because I wanted to try and lower my blood glucose even more. And a month later, my shoulder was completely unlocked. I hadn't felt this way in years. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I can move better. My back doesn't hurt anymore. So I've given it to a lot of my friends to see if they also can use it as like a recovery tool from exercise. And I'm getting a lot of feedback from people that are like, dude, I don't know what it is, but I don't need to stretch as much anymore and I can be more active and it feels like $1 million, right? So I think that what I'm learning is that the Indian gooseberry is very powerful from a metabolic perspective, but it's also very powerful from like a musculoskeletal perspective. And it's a tool that can help athletes become better athletes or help you become more active, right? So if anybody is interested in taking advantage and trying this stuff out, I strongly recommend it. And I think that if you can commit to using 2 scoops a day
Mhm.
for a 90-day period, your life can be very different 90 days from now.
Amazing. And what a great addition to any dietary strategy, really, to
No
help
doubt.
improve inflammation. And for our listeners, we have a special offer today, which is if you go to amlagreen.com/green glow, you'll be able to save up to 50% on your first order of Amla Green. So please check it out. We are excited for you we'll post the link in our show notes today. But thank you, Cyrus, for offering that to our audience and for sharing this amazing food. You know, it is amazing how food has so much healing property, so many healing properties and so much benefit, plant foods in particular. And now that since you've done the research, you know, you kind of can share that with others, and we very much appreciate that. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you guys so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, what a treat it's been to have you here in the green room today. I know that I get a chance to experience you in all of the rooms in our home, but
For better, for worse.
Whoa.
I know.
Hey, Kylie.
all of our rooms.
Woo!
But today is the green room. Thank you so much for being here. I love you, and you're doing great work out there. So keep it up.
I love you too. Thank you for the
Thanks, babe.
invitation to be here. And Lauren, I love you
Lauren, we
too.
love you. Yeah,
Yay,
we love
love you
Lauren.
back. And I'll see you guys in a
Face
few
us.
months.
Okay.
Yay.
Yay. Yes. I know. Okay. See you next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.